The Dallas Mavericks beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in game one of the Western Conference Finals, 108 to 105. A lot of people are really interested in this series. And I think game one is just an example of why everyone is so excited about this matchup. Kyrie and Luka played great this game. Kyrie got out to a great start, getting downhill, attacking the rim, and finishing with those crazy left-handed layups or those crazy left-handed floaters. And it's funny because Trevon texted me in the first quarter and he said, I love that Kyrie is back in the playoffs. And I think a lot of people have the same sentiments. It's just fun watching Kyrie play basketball, especially at the highest levels, because he just rises to the occasion and you always see something exciting with Kyrie. He got out to a great start this game. He was really aggressive early in the game, which is different from how he approached the previous series against the Oklahoma City Thunder. In that series, he was a little more patient and he picked his spots a little differently. But in this series, in game one, he was really aggressive coming out the gate. And I think watching Kyrie play basketball is something a lot of hoopers, especially young hoopers, should pay more attention to and pay closer attention to. A lot of people see the highlight tapes and the handles and how he breaks down his defender. Those things are cool. Those things are great. Those things are fun to watch. But a lot of people overlook the total package that Kyrie brings to the table. He is a complete basketball player. He is a total basketball player. When you really watch Kyrie play basketball, you understand that he has the full package. And at the beginning of the game, he started out by getting easy baskets by cutting back door and getting easy layups. He started by playing off the ball and moving off the ball, getting into dribble handoffs, getting downhill and getting into the lane. And that's where you started seeing those nice left-handed layups and left-handed float shots and things like that. And then after he established that, after he got those easy baskets, then he moved on to breaking down his defender sometimes and getting into the lane, coming off of pick and rolls, getting downhill and things like that. So I think that's something that hoopers and young hoopers can learn from Kyrie is the total package he brings and not just focusing on what he does with the ball, but what he also does without the ball. Because as a basketball player, you're not always going to have the ball in your hands. Most players are not going to always have the ball in their hands. So you have to figure out how to affect the game at a high level in different ways than just with the ball in your hands. I think Kyrie is a really good example of that. Luka, he was great this game. He played really well in the first half, but in the second half, he just took over attacking downhill, attacking that drop coverage of the Minnesota Timberwolves, getting the bigs involved, taking over by making a lot of shots down the stretch. And I think that Luka and Kyrie did a great job of attacking that drop coverage by the Minnesota Timberwolves and getting their teammates involved, which helped them go on runs and win this game for the Mavericks. The Mavericks as a team gave great effort, and I think that's one of the things that kept them in the game throughout the first half and then in the second half as well. But throughout the first half, they really struggled shooting the basketball outside of Kyrie and Luka, but they gave a lot of effort getting offensive rebounds, making hustle plays and things like that, which I think kept them in the game and helped keep them in striking distance when the Timberwolves had that lead, especially in the first half. Jaden McDaniels, I think he played very well, especially in the first half. He was the one knocking down shots for the Minnesota Timberwolves, especially since Anthony Edwards had his struggles throughout this game. A lot of the times, the Minnesota Timberwolves just had bad offensive possessions, which I think is another reason that kept the Mavs in the game and kept them in striking distance. The half-court offense of the Minnesota Timberwolves has been a concern of mine, especially going into the playoffs. If you've been watching our videos and you've heard us talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, that's been one of the things that I've consistently talked about with them. Their half-court offense at times just isn't good enough, and it can get stagnant, and they can go on stretches where they're just not getting into favorable actions that help them get easy baskets. So I think their struggles on that end were one of the reasons that kept the Mavericks in the game. On the defensive end, They did not bring as much energy as they did in previous games and in previous series. And that's one of their calling cards. The defensive end, that's what picks them up in terms of not playing well on the offensive end. The defense is how they generate turnovers and generate easy baskets that kind of ignite the offensive end in a way. But they just didn't really do that at the level that they're accustomed to in game one, which just kind of enhance the fact that they were not great on the offensive end and stretches throughout this game. I think this game is a great example of how important matchups are in the NBA, especially when you get to the playoffs, because the matchup between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves is just fundamentally different from the matchup between the Timberwolves and the Nuggets or the Mavericks and the Thunder. And what I mean by that, let's compare the Mavericks versus the Nuggets, for example. The Nuggets, they play offense fundamentally different than the Dallas Mavericks. So the coverage that the Minnesota Timberwolves use against the Nuggets might work a lot better than it does against the Mavericks. The Nuggets use Nikola Jokic in the high post to initiate offense and get dribble handoffs with him and Jamal Murray a whole bunch. And that's kind of their bread and butter. And that two-man game with Jokic and Murray, and sometimes they dump it off to Jokic in the high post and he'll play off of that. There'll be cuts and players flying off for dribble handoffs and things like that. Versus the Dallas Mavericks, it is just simply Kyrie and Luka initiating offense from the perimeter, getting screen and rolls, or sometimes even ISOs, but a lot of the time screen and rolls. And a big is just diving to the basket. His job is to catch and finish or take attention by rolling to the basket. And Luka and Kyrie, when they get downhill and play against that drop coverage, if the big doesn't help, now you have the shot. If the big comes up and helps on the driver, then you have the dump off pass or the lob pass to the big. If the big comes up and helps on the driver and the backside comes down and helps on the roll, now you have that skip pass to the corner. There's a shot there. Or if the defense rotates well, now you swing it and you play off of that and you try and get a good shot off of the rotation of the defense. So that is just an example of the difference between the matchups between the Timberwolves and the Mavericks. And one of the things that works so well against the Denver Nuggets for the Minnesota Timberwolves is that you have long athletic players that can get through those screens and get rear view contest on Jamal Murray and use your length to your advantage. Whereas this series with Luka, the length is not necessarily going to bother him all that much because Luka is a much bigger player. He knows how to use his body to create space and get to his spots whenever he wants. And so when the Minnesota Timberwolves play drop coverage, now he's getting downhill. He has a player like Jaden McDaniels on his back, and he can just get into the lane and get to where he wants. And now you're just at his mercy. He can get to his spot, knock down that mid-range jump shot. Is a really close mid-range jump shot, or really it's basically in the lane, and he knocks that down at a very high percentage, around 60%, probably a little bit over that. And when the big comes up to help on that to try and take that away, now he has the dump off to the roller. And then if the backside helps, now he just has the skip pass, and he's so tall and he's big enough to see over the defense and be able to make that pass. So this coverage that worked so well against the Denver Nuggets just doesn't work as well against the Dallas Mavericks. Lou Dort, I think, was a really good example of how being a much more physical player and getting up into Luka, not allowing him to necessarily get to his spots, it works a little bit better against Luka than Jaden McDaniels does against Luka, because Jaden McDaniels does have the length and the athleticism, but Lou Dort is much more physical and he doesn't allow Luka to just get to his spots as easily. So those are just some differences between the matchups in their previous rounds and why it's different this round. I also think on the offensive end for the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's different attacking the Mavericks defense than it was for them attacking the Denver Nuggets defense. Now, when you attack the Mavericks defense, you have shot blockers at the rim that are able to contest shots at the rim a lot better than the Denver Nuggets were with Nikola Jokic. The Timberwolves just finished in the lane a lot better against the Nuggets than they have against the Mavericks. And I think that's one thing that showed up a lot in game one. And I think we're going to see that play out throughout the rest of the series.